Hello everyone, I'm Anastasia. I welcome you all to this new session of Fundamental of Nursing. So in today's session, we are going to start with a new topic, which is the gastric lavage. So this gastric lavage is defined as the washing out of the stomach through the use of the nasogastric tube or even the stomach tube. This lavage is ordered to wash out the stomach after the patient had ingested any poison, if he has just had an overdose of any medication, or even if there is presence of gastrointestinal bleeding. So since I've also said that this can be done through the use of a nasogastric tube or a stomach tube, so here whenever you encounter any patient who does not have a nasogastric tube in place, the physician will then order the insertion of an appropriate tube. This gastric lavage can be done by placing a tube through the nose or through the mouth into the stomach. So here, once this tube has been placed, the toxicants can be removed by flushing the normal saline through the tube into the stomach, followed by suctioning of the gastric content. And this procedure is also used most frequently as an emergency treatment in the gastric dilatation or poisoning. So this is what gastric lavage is. Now, what is the mechanism of action here? There is only one action, that is the physical removal of the toxin. So here you must keep in mind that this gastric lavage is a procedure which is done in order to wash out the stomach, and this can be done mainly for those patients who have ingested any poison or who have had an overdose of medication, or even if there is presence of gastrointestinal bleeding. So from here itself we can understand that this is mainly done for the removal of the toxin. That is why the mechanism of action here only involves the physical removal of the toxins. So what is the purpose of gastric lavage? Here, as I've repeatedly been saying, that this is mainly done in order to remove the ingested poison or any irritating matter from the stomach. It can also be used to relieve nausea and vomiting in case if a patient is suffering from acute dilatation of the stomach, from pyloric stenosis, or even from intestinal obstruction. And if required, it can also be used to cleanse the stomach of the patient before any surgery is being performed for them. And it can also be used to obtain casts of epithelial cells for performing any bacteriological studies. So these are the various purposes of gastric lavage. Now let us move on to the adverse effects. So here, as each and every procedure, each and every treatment has its adverse effect, here even whenever you perform this gastric lavage to the patient, there are certain adverse effects that can occur. The first one is the aspiration of lavage into lungs. So here, since this procedure involves placement of the tube into the stomach, so here if by mistakenly the tube has been placed into the lungs than into the stomach, so if you perform the procedure such as flushing using the normal saline or suctioning, so instead of doing it in the stomach, there may be an aspiration of lavage into the lungs. Mechanical injury can also be caused due to the placement of the gastric tube. Endotracheal placement of gastric tube can also occur, whereby instead of placing the tube from the nose or from the mouth into the esophagus and down into the stomach, you may by mistakenly place the tube from the nose or from the mouth into the trachea, which will then lead to the lungs. And the last one is the electrolyte imbalance. So here, even when you perform this procedure, you should make sure that you do it carefully, and before you even perform this gastric lavage, as soon as you have inserted the tube, in order to make sure that it has been correctly placed, that is, it has been placed into the stomach, you must aspirate the gastric content, and only after you have got an assurance that this tube is inserted into the stomach, then only you should start the procedure in order to prevent aspiration of lavage into the lungs, as well as to prevent the endotracheal placement of the gastric tube. Till now we have discussed about what is gastric lavage, what is the purpose, as well as the side effects. Now let's move on to the contraindications. Whenever you are performing this gastric lavage, you should make sure that you do not use it with the toxicants such as petroleum distillates, for example, the gasoline or the furniture polish, with the corrosive, that is the strong acid, strong bases, as well as the CNS stimulants, because here the act of vomiting may trigger convulsions. So whenever you are performing this gastric lavage, you should make sure that you do not use it with these toxicants. And unless secured airway has been established, this gastric lavage should never be used in an unconscious patient, as well as in those patients with impaired airway reflexes. Although in theory gastric lavage might seem to be the most direct way of removing the toxicants from the body of the patient, however, the available evidence does not support the routine use of the gastric lavage, because it has been seen that this procedure is mostly useful only for those patients who have just recently ingested any toxicant, that is within 30 minutes to 1 hour. So if a patient had already ingested the toxicant more than an hour, then this gastric lavage may not be that beneficial. Now let us move on to the principles which is involved in the gastric lavage. This gastric lavage is usually accomplished by means of siphon, and this siphon is a device which is used to draw liquids from one vessel to the other, or even from the higher level to the lower level, provided if the surface of the liquid is exposed to the atmosphere. This siphon usually operates because of the variation in the atmospheric pressure on the liquid at different levels. So this siphon is a simple apparatus consisting of a bent tube having a long arm and a short arm. The short arm of the siphon will be placed in the liquid which is to be emptied, and the long arm will be carried down to the lower level, because as I've said that this siphon consists of a bent tube having a long arm and a short arm, and as I've also said that this is mainly used in order to draw any liquid from one vessel to the other, or even from the higher level to the lower level. So even here what we will be doing is the short arm, we will be placing it in the liquid which is to be emptied, and the lower arm will be placed or will be carried down to the lower level, because here the air must be removed from the siphon tube before it operates, and as this air is removed, the fluid will also flow because of the different pressure in the two arms. So here, since the pressure in the short arm of the siphon tube is the resultant of the atmospheric pressure pressuring up in the tube, the pressure in the long arm resulting in the atmospheric pressure pressuring up in the tube, and the pressure due to the column of liquid pressuring down to the tube. In the tube, so the resultant pressure here is less than the pressure of the short arm, and the fluid will continue flowing from the short arm to the long arm in the tube. So here, since the depth of column is greater in the long arm, the resultant pressure here is less than the pressure in the short arm, and the fluid will continue flowing from the shorter arm to the longer arm until the air enters the system, and also until it produces equilibrium once again. So this is how a siphon works. So in gastric lavage, even the gastric tube acts as a siphon tube, whereby the part of the tube which enters into the stomach acts as a short arm, and the part of the tube that lies outside the body acts as the long arm of the siphon. The end of the tube that goes into the stomach lies at the level of the fluid. The level of the tube that goes into the stomach lies under the fluid in the stomach, and the other end of the tube goes below the level of the stomach. So here, once the air is expelled from the tube, the content of the stomach will also drain out. This is the principle which is involved in the gastric lavage. So here, as we have taken an example of the siphon, right? So exactly the same how the siphon will work, the gastric tube in gastric lavage will also, work in the same manner. Now let us discuss about the solution which can be used in the gastric lavage. Here we can use the plain water, especially in cases when the patient had ingested any poison which is unidentified. Normal saline weak solution of the sodium bicarbonate or even of the boric acid in corrosive poisoning. And we can also use a specific antidote if the poison is identified. So here there are three types of antidote, that is the physical, the chemical, as well as the physiological antidote. So what is physical antidote? antidote, this physical antidote, is the one which can be mixed with the poison or dilute the poison or even prevent its absorption, and by the use of this, it can also soothe and protect the mucous membrane, whereas a chemical antidote is the one that will react with the poison and neutralize it, and the physiologic antidote is the one which will be having a systemic effect opposite to that of the poison. So for example, if the poison has a depressive action, here this physiologic antidote will be having a stimulating effect on the body. So if the poison is identified, then we can use any one of these three antidotes. So these are the various solutions which can be used in the gastric lavage. Since we know about the solution, we also should know about the amount of fluid which can be provided. So if the poison is identified, then we can use any one of these antidotes. Now here, since we have talked about the solution, here we can also provide fluid, and the amount of fluid will differ from one person to the other. Usually this gastric lavage will be carried until the return flow is clear. However, about 500 ml of fluid is to be administered at a time in order to reach all parts of the mucous membrane of the stomach. So these are the various solutions that you can provide, as well as if you are administering the fluid, then you should administer it in this amount. So I'll be concluding this topic for today. In today's session, we have discussed about what gastric lavage is, what is the mechanism of action, what are the purpose, the adverse effect, the contraindication, the principles which is involved in the gastric lavage, as well as the various solutions which can be used in the gastric lavage. So I hope you have got a clear understanding of this topic. I'll be meeting you in another session where we will be discussing about the various steps we need to follow whenever we are performing this procedure. So until then, have a good day. Thank you.